Hi, welcome to Bloom Podcast. I'm Courtney. I am a mental health nurse turned life coach.
And I'm Sydney, a certified Canadian counselor. Together, we're going to be discussing all things mental health and counseling.
We hope you join us.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's podcast. Today, we are chatting about my favorite topic. No, I'm just kidding. But Courtney's least favorite topic.
She's not kidding.
We are talking about mindfulness. I think specifically mindfulness for real life. So I don't want to talk about, let's sit down and do a 45-minute mindfulness practice every single day. But what does real life mindfulness actually look like?
I don't know, but you seem really jazzed up about this topic. It's scaring me. I'm not bringing the same energy as Sydney to this.
I just think mindfulness is so helpful. And you know what's funny? When I was in my graduate program, I did a course on mindfulness outside of my graduate program as part of my practicum. And so part of it was practicing a lot of mindfulness. And I had a really hard time with mindfulness for a really long time. I did not enjoy it. I didn't want to do it. Every once in a while, I would be having an off day or be really stressed out. My spouse would be like, "Oh, what about trying mindfulness?" And I was like, "Get away from me. I don't want to do it." Yeah. So I've been on the mindfulness hating train.
So I don't even know how to say it. So I've been an educator where I've taught cognitive behavior therapy with mindfulness, and it was an education-based class. And obviously within those parameters, we promoted and educated a lot on mindfulness. And as much as I personally don't practice it in the formal way, I am a big fan of evidence-based practices. And you can't find anything much better in that realm than mindfulness. It just has a plethora of benefits, and there's zero negative effects. And as much as I wish I practiced it more, I've actually thought about becoming a mindfulness instructor before because of just how powerful it is and how much people need it. But then when I did some reflection, I'm like, that's kind of being a fraud because I don't practice it in my day-to-day life.
See, and I think it's so funny that you say you don't practice it, because just in the conversations we've had, whether it be before an episode or even during some of our episodes, you actually do. So the first one that even comes to mind is on our sleep podcast, you talked about counting sheep. That's mindfulness.
That's true. I guess I don't like the formal, maybe when I think of mindfulness and I think of Sydney, I think of woo-woo things.
And I think that's why a lot of people get really hung up, to be honest, is that they think of mindfulness and they think of you picture that person sitting on a yoga mat with 10 candles around them, and
their legs crossed, and you're like, I can't even cross my legs, sister. So
yeah, I think mindfulness can seem pretty out there, and I think if it doesn't seem pretty out there for the other person, it seems really unattainable.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you both of those are wrong.
Sydney's here to lay down the law of mindfulness.
And I think that's why I am so passionate about talking about mindfulness for real life, because you're saying, it is so helpful. It has no downsides. It is so beneficial for our mental health, for our well-being, for just our day-to-day life.
Physical health.
Yeah, there's all these benefits where it positively impacts us, and for it to feel like it's too hard, it's too out there, it's too weird, it's too woo-woo, I think is such a loss, because there are these wonderful things you could be getting if you just were able to figure out, how do I apply this in my real life?
Yeah, and you might be like me where you're already practicing it without even knowing it.
Yeah. So kind of the beginning piece is kind of understanding what mindfulness is. And the reality of mindfulness is I think people confuse mindfulness with meditation. And they're not the same thing.
No.
Mindfulness is bringing our awareness to the present moment.
Without judgment.
Yes. Those are the two big pieces. The present moment without judgment. That's it. And so that's why I think mindfulness can be brought to our day-to-day, hour-by-hour life, is because it's not go sit down and listen to river sounds for 45 minutes. It's just bringing your attention to right now without judgment.
So you talk about right now, And like, I'm just thinking right now I'm recording a podcast. Like, how do I bring mindfulness in? Like, you can bring mindfulness into any activity or any
Yeah.
part of your day, right?
Yeah. So basically, the being unmindful would be if you were doing this podcast with me and thinking about the 30 things you need to do when we're done recording.
Oh, so like last episode.
So, right. So if you wanted to be mindful right now, every time your brain wanders to, oh, I have to do laundry when we're done, bringing it back to what's happening right now in front of me. I'm having this conversation with you.
Yeah, so even just like focusing on your words versus thinking about how I'm going to respond.
Yeah.
Could be mindful, right?
Absolutely. And I think if we wanted to bring mindfulness into our relationship, that can look like.
I thought you were talking about your and my relationship, and I was like, ooh, don't.
But any relationship, right? Our relationship with our friends, our relationship with our family, bringing mindfulness into it can look like not having a conversation with someone and being on your phone.
Yeah.
Right?
That's hard.
Or, if someone's telling you something, not always thinking of what do I have to tell them next? Or what am I going to do when this conversation's done? Or I need them to do X, Y, and Z. It's focusing on what are they saying right now? And how do I engage with that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think that is where we can see mindfulness having all these benefits beyond even our mental health. That's going to enrich that relationship. If you are being present, it's going to be such a better relationship because you're hearing what that person's saying and you're not just like half listening, half reading the newspaper.
Yeah. And I mean, the other person can sense that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they will bring more to that relationship as well once they have that level of comfort with you.
Yeah, exactly. So when we're thinking about mindfulness, our brains don't always just naturally pay attention to what's happening right now. They kind of wander, right? Lots of times they're going to go to the future. I have to do laundry later. I have to do X, Y, and Z, or the past. Oh, last time I went to this store, this happened and this happened. Or, oh, earlier today, this person cut me off in traffic or whatever.
I should have said this in this conversation.
Yeah. And so it's really just bringing that awareness to right now. And so when we're practicing mindfulness, when our brains go off to the future or off to the past, all we do when we're practicing mindfulness is non-judgmentally come back to right now. And so that can just sound like, oh, I've noticed I'm thinking about what happened earlier. I'm going to focus on right now. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, I should have been paying more attention to my spouse, because we're practicing non-judgmental. So we're just saying, oh, my brain wandered off. I'm going to bring it back to right now.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest points. Maybe this isn't even what we're talking about. Clearly, I was a big mindful enough. But I think something to bring into this is that it doesn't have to be something else you're adding to your day. You can bring mindfulness into any part of your day that you're doing. So one of my favorite examples is washing the dishes. But now I have a dishwasher, so I don't do that as much. But like washing the dishes or taking a shower and just noticing like the sensations that you're feeling, right? Like how the water feels on your hands and what the bubbles look like. So I oftentimes, and Sydney, you're maybe correct me if I'm wrong or whatnot. When I think of mindfulness, I think of like tuning into our senses.
Totally.
Yeah. I think of like, what do I hear? What do I smell? What do I see?
I think because our senses help us stay present, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you cannot smell something from the past. You cannot feel something from the future.
Yeah.
Our senses are always in the here and now. And so if mindfulness is really hard, tuning into your senses can be a really great way to bring your awareness to right now.
Yeah. So there's a mindfulness practice that we've done in groups before where you're given a candy to hold and just like noticing how it feels in your hand and like only paying attention to that and then moving it from your hand to your mouth and like just kind of that whole process. So I think I just want to reiterate that like this isn't something you have to put a lot of thought and energy into. It's just something you have to bring intention to.
Yeah. And so kind of that idea of like mindfully eating, you can mindfully eat by paying attention to the smell and the texture of your food and really enjoying it. But also, if we're talking about really real life, mindful eating can look like sitting at the table instead of in front of the TV, putting away your phone instead of scrolling on it while you're eating. I think especially if you're someone that eats meals alone, whether it's you're having breakfast and you're alone or you live alone and you take all your meals alone, it's really easy to be distracted while you eat. And then all of a sudden you had this whole wonderful meal and you haven't enjoyed any of it because you haven't even been aware that you're having a meal.
Yeah.
Right? And so it doesn't have to be a whole big thing. You don't have to have every bite and like chew it for 45 seconds and feel the breakdown of the food in your mouth. It can just be, I'm going to be in the present moment right now. And this present moment is I'm having a meal. So I'm going to put away my phone. I'm just going to sit down. I'm just going to eat it.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point. And I guess, and we'll get into this later, I'm sure Sydney will get into this later, is that especially if you're alone and this is new to you, your mind is going to continually wander.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a little bit frustrating. So I think giving yourself that grace of like, if this is a new practice, maybe setting a time frame for yourself of how long you want to practice, because it can be exhausting to kind of feel like you're failing, right? When your mind wanders and you're constantly bringing it back. So I think a good place to start is just kind of setting, whether it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever feels reasonable to you, when you start practicing, because it can be a bit exhausting.
Yeah.
And it can be a little bit frustrating in the beginning if it's not something that you're used to.
Yeah. And I think that's where that non-judgmental piece really has to take center stage, right? So when your mind is wandering, because it's going to wander, everybody's mind wanders. My mind wanders. People who've been doing mindfulness for years, their mind wanders. Maybe not as much as the first time, but that's brains, right? They don't always do exactly what we want them to do. And so having the dialogue of, instead of being like, oh, my mind wandered again, just, whoop, my mind wandered. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to right now.
Yes. No, exactly. And I think that is mindfulness in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's just being aware and being present non-judgmentally. It doesn't have to be any more than that. And I think that's where people sometimes can be so hung up, is we create all these expectations, we create all these hoops we have to jump through. And the reality is, you can mindfully shower, you can mindfully wash dishes, you can mindfully eat, you can mindfully have a conversation with someone, but also you do not have to be mindful every second of the day to reap those benefits.
Yes.
Right? So if you're going to mindfully have breakfast, done, you did it. And you get so many benefits from that. You know, if you are someone that normally is scrolling the news, just without even having the benefits of all the stuff that comes with mindfulness, just right there, you might notice a stress reduction. You might have less cortisol going through your body, kind of putting you on edge. You might notice that you've enjoyed your breakfast more. Your morning might feel more leisurely. Whatever. You might feel none of those things, but you definitely are not going to feel worse.
Yes. Definitely not going to feel worse. So we're talking about, we've kind of just broadly mentioned the benefits of mindfulness. Maybe it might be helpful for somebody who isn't super into mindfulness, or maybe is a little bit hesitant and like, why is it so important to practice mindfulness?
Yeah. It's a great question. So lots of people have found when they practice mindfulness, they have like a reduction in rumination. So rumination is kind of where your brain really sits on one thing and over and regurgitates and regurgitates and regurgitates in a way that is not productive and not helpful. So someone who's practicing mindfulness might notice a reduction in that. And naturally, if they're not ruminating as much, those people are less stressed. They might notice a decrease in anxiety, as well as kind of, some people have found when they're practicing mindfulness, they have a little bit more bandwidth and they're less emotionally reactive. So that practice of kind of focusing on the present moment gives them a little more space to make a choice instead of always reacting right off the flip.
Yeah, I think it kind of, when I think of mindfulness and how I've seen it in other people, and of course this is coming from a mental health lens and there's physical benefits, but those aren't generally the people that Sydney and I are working with. But I think it really gives your tolerance, it expands your tolerance window. So whether that be like with other people, whether that be what you're able to take on in a day personally, I think it just kind of, it lengthens, strengthens, expands.
Yeah, just kind of gives us more bandwidth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, naturally, this one makes a lot of sense to me. People who are practicing mindfulness are going to have a little bit easier time focusing. And so if you're someone who's been really stressed, having a hard time focusing, pretty anxious, mindfulness could be really helpful for you. As well, lots of people who practice mindfulness feel more satisfied in their relationships. And again, right, we talked about that. If you're being mindful when you're having a conversation, you're going to feel more connected. You're going to feel more in tune. You're going to know what that other person's actually talking about. I think a lot of things that are benefits of mindfulness, when you take the time to think about it, just make sense because you're practicing just being aware, being present. And I think we're hearing so much about mindfulness because as a society, we're more and more distracted. There's so much noise.
Yeah, there's so much social media, there's so much general media, there's so much just everything in our lives we're busy and we're running, right? I think there's just so much pressure to conform, to be a certain way in society, whether it's like productivity wise or whether it's like maintaining relationships wise or whatever it might be. There's so much expectations and distractions that it's easy to get lost in these things. And all of those expectations, all of those distractions, all of those things can contribute negatively to our physical and mental health. And mindfulness is kind of creating a barrier to some of that noise,
Yeah,
right?
it's like a stopgap, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
think about someone's cell phone. We have these really amazing smartphones, but also with that comes news at your fingertips 24 hours a day, social media 24 hours a day, always available. For a lot of people, their work can call or text at any time. They're never off the clock. Same with emails, banking. Like we have all these things at our fingertips, which is so wonderful. But also with that comes, it's hard to get a break. It's hard to have a gap in our brains because we're always on.
Yes, and I think, yeah, in addition to, of course, our mental health, like it takes a toll, right? It can sleep. We've talked about sleep.
Yeah.
These things will affect our sleep. These things can affect our blood pressure. These things can affect people with kind of chronic illnesses or pain. And mindfulness is once again setting up a bit of a buffer
Mm-hmm.
and a barrier for you to have a higher tolerance for things coming in, and it's going to protect you, right? It's going to help maintain your blood pressure. It's going to help keep your pain at bay. And I mean, not mindfulness in and of itself, but it's a piece of your, whether you want to call it treatment or well-being, it's a
Yeah.
piece of that puzzle.
Right. Like if you're experiencing pain, mindfulness is not Tylenol
Curing
3.
it.
Like
You
it's not
know.
gonna, yeah. But if you're experiencing pain and you're stressed or you're anxious or you are just at max capacity, creating that buffer is going to, it's going to increase your well-being. Maybe not
Yeah, so
exactly on the pain front, but for sure on the emotional bandwidth. And I know from when I've been in pain, that emotional bandwidth shrinks right down, right? You just have less to give. You have less that you're able to put up with because you have so much else going on. And the same for anything else, right? If you are in a high stress job and now all of a sudden you come home and you're trying to talk to your spouse, your child, you just have less bandwidth because you've given it all at work.
yeah.
And so that's where mindfulness just can bring us back a little bit, give us a little more stretch, a little more bandwidth. So we've talked about you can eat mindfully, you can pay attention in conversation, you can mindfully wash dishes. One of the ones that I really love is a mindful walk, or another, I've also heard it called a noticing walk.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's not just going for a walk, but it's noticing as I'm walking through nature, what is bringing me joy right now, right? And so when we think about that, what is bringing me joy right now? We're in the present moment. You're actively looking for what do I love out here when I'm on the trail, or what's bringing me joy as I walk through my neighborhood. And every time you focus on, oh, I love those lights, you're in the present moment, right? Every time you're like, oh, that shrub is very fancy. They've sculpted it into a duck. Wow. You're in the
Where are you
present.
walking? What is your trail?
It's very classy. No, I'm just kidding.
Apparently so.
But every time you bring your attention to what you're noticing around you, your brain is not thinking about the past and the future. And so something like a noticing walk automatically keeps bringing your mind to the present moment. So it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can just be, I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk and I'm going to walk around noticing everything I love, everything that brings me joy. That's it.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, Sydney, and I'm thinking like I love to go for walks. I don't know how attainable that is for me. I find that I practice mindfulness the best with like guided type things. So for me, like a guided yoga, so like mindful movement, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm following a yoga video, but also like just doing an app or a YouTube thing is a lot easier for me to kind of have a voice coming at me and be able to put my attention into that. And
Mm-hmm.
it kind of shuts out that outside noise and that past thinking and that future thinking.
Yeah.
So I think I'm down with the movement piece.
I remember you saying that in our exercise episode that you like to really focus on what you're doing.
Yeah.
It sounds like when you are exercising, you are really mindful.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to take my wins where I can get them, right? So,
Well,
yeah.
and I think that then makes sense to me why movement is so restorative for you, right? You've
Mm-hmm.
got the movement piece, you're getting those endorphins, you're getting that all that good stuff is flooding your brain. And also you have this sneaky mindfulness kind of doubling up for you.
Yeah, because when I'm in that moment, I'm literally, it's like my me time. I'm never thinking about anything else. And there's been other times where I guess I haven't thought of that as being mindful. And when I reflect back, it clearly is a really mindful practice. But yeah, like I was just mentioning, is if I'm setting out with the intention to be mindful, I'm usually listening to like an app or something on YouTube. It doesn't happen often, friends. But if it does, a guided practice is what I like.
Yeah. And so I think the reality of mindfulness is the more you do it, the easier it is. But it's kind of one of those things where even a little bit is helpful. If you did it 4 times a year, you're still going to get a benefit. So you
Yeah.
don't have to be like a superstar to get some of the wonderful benefits of mindfulness. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about mindfulness for real life. It doesn't have to be annotatable. It doesn't have to be out there. You can follow something like a guided mindfulness practice, but you don't have to. You can
Mm-hmm.
simply walk through your neighborhood and be like, ah, these green lights, love it. This shrub, also love it. That's being mindful.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point, and I think I'm hoping that it kind of expands people's not expectations, but people's understanding
Mm-hmm.
of what
Yeah.
mindfulness is, and makes it seem more attainable.
Yeah.
And the more you practice, obviously, the more you do it, the more benefits you reap. But like Sydney said, if it's not something that's hitting you every single day, whenever you can incorporate it, it's never a bad thing.
Yeah. So if from this you go and try and eat dinner without your phone, that's a win. If you go for a walk and you pay attention to nature, awesome. If you go on YouTube and search like 5-minute mindfulness, still amazing. I think no matter what you're doing, if you're just trying a little, you're going to get some awesome benefits. And so hopefully from here, maybe this inspires you to try a little bit of mindfulness.
I'm inspired.
Oh, I'm so glad. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we hope that this inspires you or helps you a little bit in some way.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Thanks for listening. You can follow us on our socials, thebloom.podcast on Instagram and Bloom on Facebook. Rate, review, share, and subscribe today.
This is not intended to be taken as medical advice. Please seek medical help for any mental health needs. If you are experiencing a crisis, please go to your nearest ER.